I was halfway through my morning coffee, just about to take the last glorious sip, when I noticed something weird in the reflection of my kitchen window. 4 figures, standing in a perfect little formation on my sidewalk, like they were about to serve me a warrant, matching polo shirts, sunglasses, that stiff, overconfident stance of people who really wanted to feel important. My first thought? Jehovah's Witnesses. My second, a surprise home inspection. But then I noticed the woman in the middle, arms crossed, face twisted in that classic, "I disapprove of your existence" expression. Oh no, it was her, Karen. Every neighborhood has one. That one self-appointed dictator who acts like she was chosen to uphold the moral values of the community. The woman who starts Facebook fights over trash bins being 1 inch out of place. The person who lives for HOA meetings like their Supreme Court hearings. And today, she was on a mission. By the time I put my mug down and walked to the door, they were already marching up my driveway. The second I cracked it open, Karen puffed up like a prosecutor, about to make the case of a lifetime. "You are in serious violation of HOA regulations, and we are here to take action." She didn't even breathe between words. No introduction, no explanation. Just straight to "you are guilty." I stared at her, blinked. What? A man to her left, beer belly straining against a way too tight polo, cleared his throat and held up a clipboard, like he was presenting hard evidence in a courtroom. "You have failed to comply with multiple community standards. We have issued notices, and they have been ignored." I frowned. Notices? I hadn't gotten anything. Karen, apparently sensing weakness, smirked and reached into her fanny pack. Yes, fanny pack, like she was about to pull out a federal indictment. Instead, she whipped out a laminated sheet of paper and shoved it in my face. "As per the HOA's legal right, you are now being placed under community detention until these matters are resolved." Detention? Did I just hear that right? I slowly reached out, took the laminated paper, and scanned the text. A list of ridiculous infractions. Unauthorized paint color on garage door. Unauthorized vehicle parked in driveway. Non-compliance with HOA meeting attendance. Failure to uphold the neighborhood's standard of conduct. I almost laughed out loud. My garage door had been the same color since I moved in. The so-called unauthorized vehicle was my own truck, parked in my own driveway. And as for failure to uphold the standard of conduct, that was just their fancy way of saying I didn't show up to their boring HOA meetings to listen to Karen rant about lawn heights. I looked up. What the hell is community detention? Karen straightened her back, smiling like she'd just landed a checkmate. "It means we are invoking the HOA's right to place you under civil custody until this matter is addressed." Beer belly. Bob took a step forward and, no joke, pulled out a pair of plastic handcuffs. "Plastic. You can come quietly," he said, voice a little shaky, "or we'll have to escort you." I swear to God, I thought I was being pranked. I looked around for cameras. Maybe some YouTube prankster was about to jump out and yell, "Gotcha!" But nope, these people were serious. I stared at the cuffs. "Those are plastic." Karen huffed. "That's not the point." Beerbelly Bob tightened his grip. "We have authority." I almost let them keep talking just to see how far this insanity would go. But then I sighed, reached into my back pocket, and pulled out my badge. Town Marshal. I held it up, letting it gleam in the sunlight. "Good to know you think you can make arrests," I said slowly, "because at this moment you're committing a felony." Karen's smile evaporated. Bob's plastic cuffs lowered. "You are currently impersonating law enforcement," I continued. "And if you actually tried to detain me, I'd be within my right to arrest you for attempted kidnapping." The silence was deafening. Karen's eye twitched. One of her minions coughed awkwardly, Now, I said, taking a step forward. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to walk off my property before I start taking this very seriously. 5 seconds? They didn't need 2. Beer belly. Bob turned so fast his polo nearly ripped. The other 2 followed. Karen, red-faced and furious, lingered just long enough to hiss, "This isn't over," before storming away. I watched them leave, took a deep breath, and laughed. Oh, Karen. She had no idea who she was messing with. The next morning, I walked outside to take out my trash. Only, there was a problem. My trash bins were gone. Not knocked over, not moved, just vanished. I checked the curb, the side of the house, even peeked over my fence. Nothing. And then I saw her, standing across the street, arms crossed, smug little smile. Karen. She tilted her head, sipped from her coffee mug, and gave me the slowest, most satisfied nod I'd ever seen. Oh, so that's how it was going to be. I ignored her, walked back to my porch, and found something taped to my door. A letter. HOA letterhead. I ripped it open. Due to continued non-compliance, you are now prohibited from using community waste disposal services. Until further notice, trash pickup privileges have been revoked. Revoked. This woman stole my garbage cans and revoked my ability to throw away trash. I took a deep breath, crumpled the letter, and tossed it where my trash can should have been. All right, Karen. Game on. That evening, I came home to find something new waiting for me. A traffic cone, right in the middle of my driveway. Next to it, a laminated sign, zip-tied to a wooden stake. Garage access revoked by order of the HOA. I squinted, took a step closer. Was this woman seriously trying to ban me from my own garage? I grabbed the sign, ripped it off, and tossed it into my yard. Then I picked up the cone, turned it over in my hands, and without breaking eye contact with Karen, who was watching from her porch, rolled it onto the sidewalk. A few seconds later, 2 of her minions appeared. One had a notebook, the other had a pen. They started writing things down. I nearly lost it. Was this some kind of strike system? Were they keeping a record of my infractions? I turned, walked up to my porch. "Hey, Karen," I called. She stood up straighter, trying to look unimpressed. I smirked. "You're going to have to try a lot harder than that." And I walked inside. But, oh, Karen wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The next morning I woke up and went outside, still half asleep, to take out the trash. It wasn't until I reached the side of the house that I realized something was wrong. My trash bins were gone. Not tipped over, not moved a few feet, gone. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was losing it. Maybe I forgot to bring them back from the curb after pickup. I walked to the front of the house. Nothing. Checked behind the bushes next to the garage. Nothing. And then, like clockwork, I felt it. That feeling that I was being watched. I turned my head and, sure enough, across the street, standing with her arms crossed like some kind of evil HOA overlord, was Karen. A steaming cup of coffee in one hand, a victorious little smirk on her face. I exhaled slowly. I wasn't even mad. I was impressed. This woman had actually stolen my trash cans. I locked eyes with her and gave her a slow, sarcastic nod. She did the same. A silent battle of wills. I considered walking across the street, knocking on her door, and demanding them back, but I already knew how that would go. She'd deny everything, act confused, maybe even play the victim. I could already hear it. "Why would I take your trash cans? That's ridiculous. Maybe you should be more responsible with your property." Number. That's what she wanted. She wanted me to react, to explode, to make a scene. Not happening. Instead, I turned around, walked back inside, and grabbed my phone. If Karen thought I was playing games, she was in for a rude awakening. I called the waste management company directly. "Hi, I need a replacement for my trash cans. They've gone missing." The lady on the other end sighed. "Again? That's the third one this week." "Wait, third?" "Oh yeah," she continued. "It's been happening a lot in your neighborhood. People reporting their cans missing, and then they magically turn up later, on someone else's property." Oh, this was better than I thought. I leaned against the counter, grinning. "Any chance I could get a few extras delivered? Maybe, say, 5 or 6? She chuckled. "I don't see why not. I'll put the order in for you. Appreciate it." Now, it was just a waiting game. 2 days later, a truck pulled up and unloaded 6 brand new trash cans in front of my house. I made sure Karen saw me dragging them one by one into my backyard. The next morning, I woke up, went outside, and every single one of them was still there. Karen must have realized she couldn't out-trash can me, but she wasn't done, not even close. Later that afternoon, as I pulled into my driveway, something immediately caught my attention. An orange traffic cone, sitting dead center, blocking my garage. Next to it, a large laminated sign, zip-tied to a wooden stake. "Garage access revoked by order of the HOA." I stared at it, stared at the cone, then turned my head to see, yep, Karen. Standing on her porch, arms crossed, watching, waiting for my reaction. I walked over, ripped the sign off, and tossed it to the side. Then, without breaking eye contact with Karen, I bent down, picked up the cone, and rolled it onto the sidewalk. A moment later, 2 of her minions came scuttling out from behind a hedge. One had a notebook, the other had a pen. They wrote something down, like I had just committed a serious offense. I folded my arms and raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you writing?" The one with the notebook hesitated before mumbling. "Owner removed an official HOA notice. Improperly." I laughed. "Improperly? In my own driveway?" They both exchanged a look like 2 kids who just realized they were about to get grounded. Across the street, Karen's face was already turning red. "That sign was an official sanction," she shrieked. "For what?" "For violating community guidelines." I sighed, pinched the bridge of my nose. "Karen, you can't just make up rules and enforce them like you run the place." "Actually," she huffed, "I can. And I have the full support of the HOA. The HOA has no legal power, Karen. You just think you're above the rules." "No, I think you make up rules when you're bored." She glared. I smirked. Then, without another word, I turned around and walked inside, leaving her fuming on the sidewalk. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, while I was at work, I got a phone call from one of the only sane neighbors on the street. "Dude," he said, voice low, "you need to get home. Now." "Why?" "The police are outside your house." I sat up. "What?" "Yeah, 2 cop cars, some officers. They're talking to Karen." I was already grabbing my keys. "What's going on?" "She told them there was a man with a gun on your property." I nearly laughed out loud. "You're joking." I wish I was. I didn't even bother saying goodbye. I just hung up, jumped in my car, and sped home. Sure enough, the second I pulled onto my street, I saw them. 2 police cruisers parked in front of my house, lights flashing. And there was Karen, standing in the middle of the sidewalk, putting on the performance of a lifetime. Hand on her chest, eyes wide, voice trembling. It was terrifying, officers. He's always so hostile, and I swear I saw him brandishing something dangerous. The two officers looked unimpressed. The second they saw me pull up, their entire demeanor changed. I parked, got out of my car, and watched as both cops exchanged looks. One of them, a guy I actually knew, sighed. "Boss, we got a report about suspicious activity involving a firearm at this residence." I glanced at Karen, then back at him. "Let me guess. This report came from her?" Karen gasped. "I only reported what I heard. Some neighbors were concerned." The other officer shook his head. "Yeah, that's what I figured." "Let me make something real clear," I said, stepping forward. "Making false police reports? That's a crime." Karen's face drained of color. "And harassing a law enforcement officer?" I continued. "That's another crime." One of the cops turned to her. "Ma'am, unless you have actual evidence, I'd suggest you stop wasting our time." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed back inside her house. I let out a breath, turned to the officers. "Sorry about that." One of them chuckled. "You're not the one who needs to apologize." And just like that, they left. But as I watched Karen peeking out from behind her curtains, I knew she was not done, not by a long shot. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of a heavy-duty truck pulling up right in front of my house. Groggy, I swung my legs out of bed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes as the low hum of idling engines and the clanking of metal tools reached my ears. Something was happening. I grabbed a shirt, threw it on, and peered out my bedroom window. My stomach sank. A full construction crew was unloading from 2 work trucks. They had everything: jackhammers, shovels, a mini excavator, and a lot of orange cones. At least half a dozen workers in reflective vests were standing around, stretching, cracking their knuckles, like they were about to start a full-scale demolition project. And then I saw her. Across the street, standing with her arms crossed, sipping from that ever-present coffee mug, like she had personally orchestrated this entire event. Karen. A sinking realization hit me. This was her next move. I stormed downstairs, shoved my feet into the nearest pair of shoes, and yanked open the front door. The nearest worker, clipboard in hand, spotted me and nodded like this was a completely normal situation. "Morning, sir. We're here to start the scheduled excavation and pipe repairs." I frowned. "Excavation?" "Yeah," he continued, flipping through papers. "HOA reported a severe underground water leak on this property. Said it's been causing major foundational damage and needs to be fixed immediately." I stared at him, deadpan. "And you just took their word for it? No inspection? No verification?" The guy hesitated, shifting on his feet. "Well, they did fill out the emergency request form, signed by the HOA president herself. He glanced down at the paper. "Karen Thompson?" "Of course." I exhaled slowly, resisting the overwhelming urge to march across the street and throw her coffee into the bushes. Instead, I turned back to the foreman. "All right, pack it up." The guy blinked. "Sir?" I reached into my pocket, pulled out my badge, and let it gleam in the sunlight. "You're trespassing on private property under false pretenses. Unless you personally want to be held liable for any damages, I suggest you take your crew and go." The workers' eyes widened. A few of the guys in the back exchanged looks. Then, without another word, the foreman raised his hand and gave a sharp whistle. "All right, guys, pack it up. We're out of here." As the crew started loading their equipment back onto the trucks, Karen stormed across the street, heels clicking against the pavement like she was about to personally fight me. "You can't do this," she screeched, her face already turning a dangerous shade of red. I turned, completely unfazed. "Do what exactly?" "Stop you from digging up my yard for a leak that doesn't exist." The HOA has the authority to manage community infrastructure. I crossed my arms. And I have the authority to arrest you for trespassing and filing fraudulent repair claims. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. For the first time, she hesitated. But I wasn't finished. I stepped forward, lowering my voice just enough so she could hear me, but not her little minions lurking in the background. Karen, I suggest you start thinking very carefully about what you do next, because you've officially crossed into criminal territory. She swallowed. Her lip twitched. Then, with an exaggerated huff, she turned on her heel and stomped back across the street, muttering under her breath. I watched her go, arms still crossed. Oh, she was pissed. But this was just a warm-up, because Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. The official letter from the HOA arrived 3 days later. When I saw the envelope, I already knew it was going to be something ridiculous. I stood on my porch, ripped it open, and read the words printed neatly on HOA letterhead. Due to continued non-compliance and hostility toward community leadership, your behavior is now under disciplinary review. I snorted. Disciplinary review? I kept reading. Failure to comply with HOA standards has resulted in an official decision to revoke your residency privileges. Effective immediately, your presence in this neighborhood is no longer desired. The HOA is taking steps to begin the process of removing you from the community. I laughed out loud. These people were actually trying to evict me from my own house. Oh, this was going to be fun. That evening, I strolled into the HOA disciplinary meeting like I was walking into a comedy show. The community center was packed. Chairs were lined up in perfect rows, every single seat filled with nosy neighbors who had nothing better to do than listen to Karen's latest power trip. And there she was, sitting at the head table, stacks of papers in front of her, a smug little smile on her face. She thought she had me. She thought this was her moment. I sat in the designated defendant chair, leaned back and crossed my arms. All right, let's get this over with. What am I on trial for today? Karen cleared her throat dramatically, like she was about to read off a criminal indictment. We are gathered here today to discuss the deeply concerning behavior of a resident who has repeatedly defied community standards, disregarded HOA rulings, and shown a blatant lack of respect for the neighborhood. I rolled my eyes. Karen. She sniffed. Your actions have directly harmed the well-being of this community. I leaned forward. How, exactly? She lifted a page and began reading off my alleged crimes. Failure to comply with garage door regulations. Refusing to acknowledge official HOA parking restrictions. Displaying open hostility toward HOA leadership. Threatening the integrity of community policies. I held up a hand. You're really stretching here, Karen. Let's cut to the chase. You want me out of the neighborhood? Karen pressed her lips together. Considering the number of offenses you've accumulated, you can't evict me. Silence. I folded my arms, my voice turning cold. The HOA doesn't own my house. You don't control my mortgage. You have zero legal power to kick me out. The room was dead silent. Some of the neighbors shifted in their chairs, glancing at each other, like they were just now realizing Karen might have been full of it this whole time. Karen's eye twitched. Well, this isn't a gated community, Karen. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a near whisper. You don't have power here. And this entire meeting? It means nothing. She turned bright red. A few neighbors coughed awkwardly. And for the first time, Karen looked nervous. She knew she had lost. But the problem with Karen, she wasn't the type to accept losing. And I had a very bad feeling she still had one last trick up her sleeve. I woke up to the sound of sirens. Loud. Close. the kind of sound that makes your stomach drop before you even know what's happening. I jumped out of bed, rushed to the window, and immediately spotted the 2 county enforcement vehicles parked right outside my house. And standing across the street, arms folded, eyes practically glowing with smug satisfaction, was Karen. Of course. I exhaled through my nose, rubbing my temples. What now? I didn't even bother putting on real shoes, just grabbed whatever was closest and walked straight out the front door. 2 men in uniforms stood near the cars, flipping through a thick folder of paperwork. One of them, middle-aged, glasses, clipboard in hand, turned to me as soon as I stepped onto my porch. "Sir, are you the homeowner?" I gave him a look. If I wasn't, this would be a really weird time to be standing on my porch. He didn't laugh. "We received a formal complaint," he continued, voice overly professional, "regarding multiple code violations on this property, including unauthorized structural modifications, illegal plumbing work, and a potential pest infestation." I blinked. "What?" Karen from across the street let out the fakest gasp imaginable. "I knew it," she practically sang. "I told you something wasn't right about that house." I turned my head slowly and stared at her. She batted her lashes, feigning innocence. I inhaled deeply, then looked back at the officer. "And who exactly filed this complaint?" He adjusted his glasses, flipping through the paperwork. "The report was filed by the Homeowners Association." Of course it was. I folded my arms. "And you guys just take their word for it?" The officer sighed. "We're required to follow up on all official reports. If there's nothing wrong, then there's nothing to worry about." Oh, I knew there was nothing to worry about. But the fact that Karen had actually gone through the trouble of filing a government report just to harass me, that was a new level of crazy. I exhaled through my nose. "Fine. Do your inspection. But when you find nothing, I want an official record stating that this complaint was completely fabricated." The second officer, who had been silent up until now, gave a small, knowing nod. The inspection started immediately. They checked everything: the foundation, the electrical wiring, the plumbing. They even looked under my house for signs of rodents. Karen stayed outside the entire time, arms crossed, watching like a hawk, waiting for them to find something. 2 hours later, they finished. The main officer flipped through his notes, then cleared his throat. "Well, sir, we conducted a full inspection and found no violations. Your property is fully up to code." I smiled. Karen across the street visibly twitched. "That means," I continued, "that this report was entirely false, which means someone wasted county resources on a personal vendetta, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a crime." Karen's smug expression shattered. The officer adjusted his glasses again. "We will be filing a note regarding the validity of this report," he confirmed. "Multiple false reports from the same entity could result in legal consequences." Karen froze. I turned to her, smiling. "Did you hear that, Karen?" She opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time since this entire war started, she looked genuinely nervous. The officers left. Karen didn't move. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, just watching her. Finally, she turned on her heel and stormed inside her house. I exhaled slowly. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The county must have taken my complaint seriously, because within a week, an audit was conducted on the HOA. And well, Karen had been very busy. The findings were worse than I expected. $30,000. Gone. Stolen. Misused. Karen had been fining residents for fake infractions, collecting the money under the guise of community improvement fees, and then using it to fund her own personal projects. Lavish dinners, luxury furniture, expensive landscaping for her house and her house alone. And worst of all, she wasn't even legally the HOA president. The bylaws required annual re-elections. She had simply skipped them every year, just never held a vote, kept herself in power through sheer force of will and intimidation. The news spread like wildfire. Residents were furious. People who once blindly followed her were turning on her overnight. A special emergency meeting was called. Karen, for the first time, looked visibly shaken as she sat at the front of the room, surrounded by people who were no longer her allies. The board members, who had also been in on her scheme, sat stone-faced, knowing their time was up. The final decision was unanimous. Karen was removed from her position. Her entire board was dissolved. An official investigation was launched into all the stolen funds, and just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse for her, the police showed up. 2 officers standing at the entrance waiting. The moment the meeting ended, Karen tried to bolt. Didn't even grab her purse, just booked it for the back exit. But the officers were faster. One of them stepped in front of her. The other pulled out the handcuffs. And in front of the entire neighborhood, Karen was arrested. Someone, God bless them, actually started clapping. As the real metal handcuffs clicked around her wrists, a voice from the back of the room called out, "Well done, Karen." She was escorted out, sputtering, flustered, humiliated. And that was the last time anyone ever saw her in that neighborhood. Her house went up for sale a few weeks later. No one wanted to buy it. The stink of her reputation clung to it like a bad perfume. Eventually, she had to move out of town. I heard rumors she started over somewhere new, a fresh neighborhood, a fresh HOA, a fresh reign of terror. But not here. Here, peace returned. The HOA was rebuilt from the ground up, with actual fair leadership this time. Fines were revoked. Ridiculous rules were thrown out. And best of all, that for sale sign in front of Karen's old house. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen.